Okay. Welcome, 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 one and all, to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. And gang, we tonight have gathered a team to talk about academia. Um, Recently in the news, there's been several scandals regarding Gay, and plagiarism. There's also been other research scandals involving Harvard as well. Um, on a more broader level, there have been many complaints about DEI and DEI uh, requirements, if you will, and how that's affected the culture of college. Uh, After October 7th, we've also had instances where several, both professors and students, have been um, had run-ins where there's been a huge amounts of anti-Semitism. But we're going to talk about all that, as well as the fact that men just aren't going to academia anymore. But first of all, 𝕍𝖎, thank you for the resub. 6 months on a 4-month streak. Really appreciate you. The multiculturalist James. Hey there, Wick. How goes it? Well, how goes it for you? It's going well for me. Origin of Logos. Nice to see you as well, gang. Once again, just so everyone knows, I am paid by Progressive Victory. I say that at the beginning of every stream. But they have not paid for or sponsored or aren't connected to this content tonight in any way, shape, or form. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. And first, we're going to introduce someone new to my channel, first time here. I'm excited to have him, the liberal professor. Go ahead, tell people who you are and kind of give an overview of the state of academia in your mind. Go ahead.
All right. So, Vic said, my name is the Liberal Professor. It's nice to meet all of you. It's great to be here. Thank you, Vic, for having me. And it's great to see Ukerist here as well. I had chats on Discord with Ukerist on a few occasions, and I know he feels passionately about this topic as much as I do. I basically make videos on YouTube about liberalism because I think it's the greatest system. And also, since Wick's channel is about the serious and the silly, and he said we want to discuss some silly topics, I figured academia would be a good place to start. So yeah.
Well, welcome, and gang, if you want to go check out his YouTubes after this and learn about liberalism, I encourage you to do so. Liberalism is based in many ways, so go check it out. But I'm excited to have you here, and I'm excited to get into it. Silly, well, we'll see. But here's how we go. Next up, someone who is no stranger to my channel, someone who I enjoy immensely and I consider a friend, Ukerist. Go ahead, tell people who you are and give us a kind of an overview of what you think of academia and the state of academia today.
Yeah, well, hi. I use the name Eucharist online. You can also call me Philip. I am intimately familiar with academia, having lived in it now for 5 years of grad school and then a couple years now of a postdoc. So I earned my PhD last year. I started a pre/postdoc right before that, and so I've taught at a couple different universities, and so I've seen it from the student side in undergrad, from now the professor side, and yeah, I mean, in terms of the state of it, I mean, you kind of summarized it. It's kind of a mess. Things are fairly fractured in a lot of ways. We keep seeing a lot of scandals that certainly are not helping contribute to public trust in academia as an institution, or plurality of institutions, I guess. Uh, and as you said, the male enrollment problem is maybe one of the strangest ones that we've got to deal with, because we don't really know why it's happening or how to deal with it. So yeah, I'm happy to see wherever this conversation goes. Hopefully, we don't bore your audience too much, and we can find some exciting things to talk about.
I'm sure we'll do fine. I guess let's start off by, in your opinions, what is today, the best thing about academia and what is the worst? And we're going to start with liberal professor. Go ahead. The best thing about it and what's the worst thing about it, in your opinion?
So I think the best thing about it, and I'm not sure if Eucharist would agree. He might actually agree with me based on the things I've seen him say on Twitter. I think the best thing about it is the concept of liberal education. and particularly the Great Books program have been very conducive to this, which is the idea that you can read great works of literature, philosophy, politics, history, architecture, and all these type of different things, and learn how to be a good citizen and how to live a good life. More importantly, how to live a happy life, because I think that's something that's sorely needed today. Everybody seems to be miserable. And I know, Wick, you were just in the trenches of politics. You probably face a couple of people who were not happy to hear you knock on their doors, and maybe some that were very happy to hear you knock on their doors. But I think that kind of speaks to the underlying sentiment today that people are generally like, need this idea of liberal education just so we can grasp what's happening today. And I think that's the biggest strength of at least social sciences, which is my background. And I think this is something that we sorely need today. And the best part of academia. The worst part of academia, there is a lot. I think one of the worst part of it is that it has kind of lost sight of its original mission, which I think, in my opinion, was to foster this sense of both critical thinking and constructive thinking at the same time, which goes back to the very heart of the liberal education in a lot of ways, to how to think critically about where you are and how to construct and build on that. I think that requires a lot of introspection that today we don't do in social sciences. And academia has effectively become kind of like trying to be like a trade school in a lot of ways. People come in, get a degree, and go do a job. That seems to be, to me, the worst part of academia, and something that a lot of people actually celebrate, to my surprise, which also speaks to the worst part of, again, academia.
Okay. We're gonna get into that. I have some questions about that actually, but first I want to hear Ukerist's answer. Same question, best part and worst part, and then we'll kind of go through it.
Yeah, I think the best part, my answer is kind of similar, which is that there are still places and pockets within the university and within certain institutions specifically where you can really have the kind of dream of what academia should be, this sort of like intellectual life, the contemplative life, if you will, that you get to read cool books, you get to teach them to cool students, you get to have exciting conversations, you get to participate in what we now call the production of knowledge, which is a little bit too industrialized for my liking, but what really just amounts to, reading old things and saying new things, or discovering new things. Both of those things are very exciting. And so I think sometimes, this may go to part of my negative, but you do have to sort of hunt for an environment where that's the case, where you have that actual curiosity and excitement for learning. My worst thing, I suppose, would be a sort of cranky old conservative critique of the university, which is that it is we exist in a time where the university model is really fragmented, where different departments and disciplines don't really speak to one another, are often doing overlapping work without realizing it, and without taking advantage of the resources that are offered. Like, the ideal of a university is you bring a bunch of people together who are specialized, yes, in different fields, but are able to have some sort of core overlap that are conversant with each other to help everybody do better at the things they can do. But it turns out a lot of the times that, like, the people down in the sociology department aren't talking to the people in the political science department, aren't understanding anything about latest advancements in neuroscience, and all these things speak to one another in important ways. But we're just not liberally educated enough, in the way liberal professor was saying, to be conversant in a wide variety of disciplines in a way that would make those conversations productive. So we have what George Grant first and then Alan Bloom called the multiversity rather than the university.
So I want to touch on something that the liberal professor brought up, and I think it's very interesting. The kind of way that academia is used by its students and how academia markets itself to its students. I've seen a lot of advertisements throughout my years. Come to our university. You can study at home and you can get your degree as quickly as possible. And we have a 92% straight to the workplace, something. And that's what it is to a lot of people. It's to go in, you get your degree, you get your accreditation, and you use that as leverage to achieve a job in the outside world, to go and get the job that you want. Now, you posited that was a flaw or a problem. Can you elaborate on that? Why? Because as a layman, right, as someone who isn't involved in academia. That is why I went to college. I wanted a degree so I could get better pay for a job. That's what I wanted. So I went there. I didn't want all this fluff and things like that. Why is that wrong? Why is that bad? Why is that academia failing? It's providing a service, right?
So I'm not going to scream because it was only 5 minutes into the discussion. And I wholeheartedly agree with what you said with respect to all these ads being out there the way they are. And I hate that so much. But first, I'm going to say something positive and then go to negative, like a good positive negative sandwich. I appreciate the fact that Ukerist dropped George Grant as a Canadian. I highly appreciate that. Dropping a Canadian philosopher's name just casually. I appreciate that very much. But also, you're right about the advertisement targeting, this idea of future opportunities. There are a couple of problems with that. The first one, first of all, I'm not saying that universities should have no role in training people to do jobs. What I'm saying is that that shouldn't be their exclusive goal. And that seems to be something that academia exclusively markets itself as, which is a huge blow to a more important part of its mission, which is effectively to be not a vanguard, but help students be productive members of society, both in terms of culture and not just in terms of taxpayer dollars. Because you go to work and you produce things and it's great, and we all appreciate WhickTV for sure, but at the end of the day, you're also contributing to a bigger dialogue, to this, I guess, since you're in the United States, to the American project, so to speak, which you can't really do via engineering degree. You need to have some sort of historical background and knowledge and where things are coming from and where they're supposed to be going. And this actually plays a really important role in the dissatisfaction a lot of people feel with social sciences in particular, again, because you're not giving them a project that they're a part of and they can be proud of. You're just kind of teaching them the technical stuff, which, again, a lot of people might hate me for saying this, but when you're going to a university, paying $100,000 for that's PhD. I don't know how much it costs in the States, but in Canada, for example, you can go up to $25,000 with student loan and stuff. I know US is even worse. But if you go to a university and the professor comes in and says, here is how every single institutions of government interacts with each other, and this is what you should know. I'm sorry, you got gypped, because you can get that out of Wikipedia. You don't need a professor with a PhD come and tell you that. You can just go on Wikipedia and find it out. The job of a professor is to come in there and say, what do you guys think? It's the professor's job to help you think creatively, because the problems you're going to face in society as a community, as an American community, is going to be different and requires creative and new ways to deal with it. Since Ukerist dropped a Canadian philosopher's name, I'm going to drop an American philosopher, Richard Rorty. He famously said the job of a philosopher in modern day is to be a creative thinker. Creativity is the backbone of making society better and more prosperous. And sorry, go on.
No, it's fine. I don't mean to interrupt, but do you think that we have lost that in universities then, the creativity that you were speaking of, the kind of spark to find new ways of learning, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing? It's been a while since I've been in college, so I don't know, but I do remember when I was in college, at least none of the people I was with seemed to want that.
Yeah, that's also somewhat true. Unfortunately, there's an appetite. Well, I would caveat that some don't want that. In my experience, and I know Ukerist have taught courses before as well, so maybe he can also speak to this. When I'm teaching the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, who are very novel and interesting thinkers, they're not very practical for the age of today in terms of, you're not going to learn quantum physics from Plato. You're not going to learn programming languages from Aristotle. That's not happening. But the way they engage with the world, and when I say creative ways, I think Aristotle has a perfect word for it, phronesis, or what's called prudence, or wisdom in a way. It's not exactly wisdom, but thinking in a way through the problems. That's what they give us, and that's a problem that goes out throughout time. And you're right, a lot of people might not want that, but I wonder if they don't want it because they have never actually gotten a taste of it, or because they genuinely have gotten a taste and are like, this is terrible. My
Can I
own
riff
experience
on
is,
that a
sorry, go
little
on.
bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's some like first I'll contest that you can't learn quantum physics from Plato. I would say you should go read Werner Heisenberg, who credits reading Plato's Timaeus for inspiring some of his musings on the quantum realm. So, but I would say too, like, I think you're right, Wick, that many people coming in don't want that. And my answer is I kind of don't care, in the sense that, a student coming in to do an engineering program probably really doesn't want to take calculus. Like, if they could get out of that class, they really would, right? I don't think the student is necessarily best positioned to tell the institution what sorts of things they should be learning. The
But
institution is
but
supposed to
they
be
are
shaping and
also
educative, right?
sure, but they are also, and I think we're going to get into this later. I almost assure you, they're also a customer at
Yeah,
the same
but
time.
I think most critiques of the university that come from the left that are based on the over commercialization of it, or sometimes it will be the universities will be accused of operating on a model that is neoliberal. I don't think that's entirely accurate, but to the extent that they're saying what basically has happened is it's been turned into a business at the expense of education, I do agree with that. I think there is something that has gone wrong there a bit, where yeah, it should not be a purely functional thing in the way that a lot of people think about it. Those that exists in the form of a trade school, like liberal professor said. There's nothing wrong with those, by the way. It's just wasn't supposed to be the mission of the university. They were supposed to be quite different things.
Yeah, and to just piggyback on that, it's true that a lot of students are customers and they're coming to get an education, but also we have to look outside the bigger picture as well. Because yeah, it's good to have an engineer that or architect, but do you really want to live in a society where an architect only builds building based on the functionality? I don't know. I like the idea of pretty buildings. That's just me. I like the idea of living in pretty things. I remember going into Boston. My dad is an engineer, and we went to Boston, and and we had this little, and this is something that as a Canadian I absolutely admire about you guys. You guys make a museum out of everything. It's awesome. We went to this water facility where there's like a small little lake, not a lake, it's like a pond even, and they filtered the water in 18th century, I think. And we were just looking at this water thing and the water filter thing, and my dad as an engineer was really really impressed, and I liked it, but I asked him, why were you impressed? He says, well, when you look at it, they even considered the beauty of it. Just look at what type of rigid they're using, what type of coloring there is to it. They even thought to that level of detail. So yeah, functionality is good and important, but we are also aesthetic creatures in a lot of ways. We like beautiful buildings, we love beautiful things, and you can get that through Plato and Aristotle a lot more. And this is, I think, one of the things. In fact, beauty is one of the perennial questions, political questions for the Greeks, which is what I found when my students engage with it. They really love that question. But it's not something we talk about in politics. Like, think about it. How many negative ads do you see? And people are like, oh, yeah, negative ads are terrible. They make politics horrible. But everybody does it because it works. That's functionality. That's pure functionality. But it's a miserable place to be. Everybody hates election season because everybody hates each other. Everybody's at each other's throat.
Look, as someone who likes politics, I find it fun, but I understand. I get what you're saying here. Um, I just I don't know if that's a failing of academia though, or a failing of the culture, because this is a cultural problem at root, in my opinion. We talked about the commercialization, or Eucharist at least talked about the commercialization of these things, and that is our culture, right? It's function, function, function. What is going to get me there the fastest and the easiest path of least resistance, and for the least amount of money, right? Or if I do play exorbitant sums, I want a luxury experience where I can get it faster and I can get it better. And that doesn't seem to be what's happening in academia. In fact, right, we have, and I wanna turn it to this just briefly. We have a problem with admissions. Can Rather than me introducing this, can you both kind of talk about your experience with admissions and your experience and the others around you, your peers experience with admissions and things like that. What are some of the ways it's done right? What are some ways it's done poorly? Can you give us an example of a university or an academic system that does it better? And can you give us an example of one that does it worse? And we'll start with Ukerist for this one, then we'll go to liberal professor.
I will say, but before I get to the enrollment thing specifically, I think you're right. There is a cultural element here, but I think it's sort of like a feedback loop in a sense, where like when you design an institution in a certain way, where the administrators of that institution are looking primarily at it like a business, or at the sort of the marketing angles, the numbers that fit on a spreadsheet, and aren't deeply connected to the broader ideals of a university. I think that tells people what universities are about and teaches them to think of it that way. As far as enrollments go, yeah, I mean, you can just look up the numbers. There are declining enrollment numbers across the board that colleges are struggling with. This is leading to all sorts of budget crises across the nation. Comes up prominently at places like West Virginia University that have cut a lot of their even their very excellent programs. Even some of their programs that, by the way, were profitable, they're cutting because of a budget shortfall. That's partially a state issue, but partially an enrollment issue. There are also a lot of smaller liberal arts schools that are really struggling with this, because we live in a world now, of course, as we've been talking about, where things are so heavily marketed. People are kind of realizing the difference between this or that liberal arts college is not that huge when it comes to a lot of them, right? There's a lot of bougie small liberal arts colleges that will charge you a ton of money to give you a fine education. And so why should I go to that one over that one over that one? And so those colleges are struggling. Even colleges with distinctives that with great appeal are struggling, and that this struggle is being felt disproportionately. The decline has hit men the hardest, and it's hit black men the hardest among those. So something is happening somewhere along the way in the process of recruiting for admissions, where just fewer men are applying, and then even the men who do get in are succeeding at lower rates. And that seems to me to be a problem. I wouldn't know exactly the origin of it or specifically how to fix it, but certainly it's causing a lot of panic for universities, like some universities that don't have large endowments that are primarily tuition funded or donation funded. When you have fewer enrollments, that not only means lower tuition dollars now, it means 10 years from now lower alumni donations, because your alumni pool is shrinking proportionally. So it looks terrible. It looks like an academia in crisis. It looks like in the next 20 years a bunch of these schools are going to close. Like, it's just inevitable. So
No, that's pretty doomer. You want to go for you want to add on to this, liberal professor, before we dig into it a little bit?
I'm afraid of adding on. That might just like shut the stream down after that. But no, I think Ukerist is right. I imagine Canadian universities have a slightly different problem than American ones, in that we take a lot of international students in comparison to the Americans. But it seems like, in fact, the government of Canada recently passed, not was the government of Canada, government of Ontario, I don't exactly remember, regarding one of the schools here that was taking a lot of international students because the domestic students aren't registering. And the international students, the domestic students here in Canada are subsidized by the government because you can apply for government loans. So it's cheaper, but the international students pay out of pocket. And for them, the school experience, I imagine there's not much of a difference between an American school and a Canadian school with regard to tuition, because they're, well, universities everywhere are really, really expensive. I spent some time in American school, but most of my time was in Canadian school, so I can't really speak to the admission part of the American school. In regard to the Canadian schools, I pretty much echo a lot of things Ukerist also said, so I guess there's a lot of overlap. It's not looking good, but also universities are having a hard time if it's just a marketing world. Academics are the worst people to sell themselves at, especially when it comes to social sciences. We are just atrocious.
Can I, going off of that, this is one of the bad things about academia that I would love to talk about actually at some point today, if it seems relevant, which is that, yeah, we are very bad at marketing ourselves. And so the people that you find who are most likely to be doing public facing content are usually terrible exemplars of being actually good scholars or actually good teachers, because the skill set to succeed in like content creation or something like that is usually quite different than what it is to be a good scholar, a good teacher, a good professor. There can be overlap, and we see examples of this. So I'm not going to say every public facing academic is like, default suspect, but certainly the picture that people get from people who present themselves as scholars online is not always the best one. There's more for that, but
sure.
There's
Go ahead.
There's also the element of that universities aren't just competing with each other by becoming trade schools. They're also competing with trade schools. And that's a secondary problem, because why would you spend 4 years getting an undergrad degree and go into a lot of debt when you can just go to a trade school, spend 2 years, and then work your way up? The financial aspect of it is just doesn't make any rational sense.
Yeah.
So
Can I give an example? Just I wish I had two actual university examples of this. I could find them if you want, but this has happened a lot of places. Smaller liberal arts schools, especially like some ones that are institutionally distinctive, like Christian schools, etc., are struggling to find ways to distinguish themselves from other schools that are very much like them. And so if they can't really lower their tuition costs, they have to find some way to attract more students. And usually that involves trying to develop some sort of program that is more attractive to a broader variety of people. So for small liberal arts schools, sometimes this has turned into nursing programs, that they want to add on nursing programs to attract, because more and more women are wanting to get into nursing because it is paying quite well right now. And so if you can start a new nursing program right now, you hope that you will get enrollment gains off of that. The problem is everyone is doing that at the same time. And so then you sink a bunch of money into an expensive program that requires extensive hiring and accreditation. And then the gains are evenly distributed among everybody else who's just got a new nursing program, and it turns out it didn't actually help you in the long run, and perhaps actually made your financial situation worse. This is how things like this, I'm not going to say that exactly, but things like this are sort of happening all over the country right now at these schools.
$2.
I also
Just real quick, $2 from Testicle Johnson to say 21% of Americans are illiterate. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, that sounds like a made up stat, to be honest with you. But I could be wrong. I'd have to Google it.
The literacy rates coming out of high school are really depressing right now, I will say.
Fair enough. And it might be true, but I guess oh man, there's a lot of different ways we could take this, but I want to try it this way.
Can I ask you a question, Wick?
You may.
Very curious, because you said that a lot of people today. I don't know. Can you hear me fine? I'm very nervous about everything breaking down.
Relax. This ain't scary. You're good. Go ahead.
Like a good professor, I'm always afraid of technology in every way, shape, and form. But what if you mentioned something that is super interesting to me? And since Ukerist invoked Grant, I'm going to use his question, and I'm going to ask you. You said that a lot of people look to universities and they're like, okay, just let me get through this as fast as I can and get it over with. Cool. What's the problem then with cheating? Why would you blame people for cheating if the point of the school is to just get through it as fast as possible? Like Grant said, it's like blaming a squirrel for stealing too many nuts for winter. It just doesn't make any sense.
So, because, and the reason I do, and I can only speak for me, you, Chris, can answer the question as well, because I'm curious what he would say. Because I think that the way that people view university and higher education now is wrong. And yes, within that context, within the just kind of straight utilitarian calculation of, okay, well, I'm here just to get accredited so I can move on, right? Makes all the sense in the world. But I think that this is part of the problem. And so when we talk about cheating, I think it just exacerbates this problem. And yeah, it creates this culture of just shortcuts. And we can see this have bleed over into the way people just live their lives in general. I think, and forgive me, right? But I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think higher education should be from a kind of a, what's the word? Aspirational. My aspirational goal towards what it should be is a lifestyle that teaches you how to be a better person, and it trains you, right? And it gives you options on to know your place in society and how you can, if you wish, either change your space in society or improve society, and you can either stay and improve where you are or move and improve that way, right? That's what it should be. And these things, shortcuts, tend to hurt. Sometimes it's good to be efficient with your time. I think that there are very many situations where you want to be efficient with your time, but we have put that as the number one thing, and I don't think it should be. That's my answer to why cheating is bad. What do you think, Ukerist?
Yeah, I think you're right. What you're describing is why it's bad, because there's this aspirational goal of like making the student a better person. Education should be it is a shaping of the whole person, the intellect and the character. I think it's inevitably that. But I would say that the things you've been describing about how students tend to think about the university and how administrators tend to think about the university does nothing but encourage cheating, in the sense that if you come in thinking that this is purely functional, what you learn in class almost doesn't matter, because what does matter is having the piece of paper that an employer looks at, and they'll train you on the job. If that's what you think, then really it's no big deal to blow off your work, and especially if you can still get decent grades by cheating. Why not? Especially as cheating because has become easier and easier. I've asked every single one of my students that I have as mentees this semester, or who have come to my office hours, I ask all of them just sort of what the vibe is right now around things like ChatGPT, and almost all of them have said that they just know everybody is using it, and of course they all deny that they're
Is
using
that
it.
cheating?
Sorry. Oh, yeah, well, if you use it to write your essay, then yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but
And so,
at what point does it? So, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
oh,
but
please.
you brought up ChatGPT, and I'm just really
Yeah.
curious, and I want to hear your answer too, liberal. I'll just call you liberal for now. Um,
Great.
I understand that if you just copy paste from ChatGPT, I think we could all understand. Yeah, that's cheating. But at what point, like, where's the line here? Because I can see some uses of ChatGPT just to kind of get an overview of things, try to get kind of like your thoughts in order and things, where it might not be cheating, where I want to learn about X, Y, or Z, and so I put a good prompt into ChatGPT, and I use that as a jumping off point to do my own research and look further into an area of study.
I think if you
What do you
use
think?
it in that way, that can be a wonderfully effective tool to sort of self-guide your thoughts in a kind of conversational way if you don't have a conversation partner. I think the problem is that students are not taught how to do that. I'm not saying they need to be taught to use ChatGPT in the classroom. Some professors are doing this. I'm mixed about it. I don't love teaching them to be more reliant on it. But if students have been trained to think, as liberal professor was suggesting, along with the especially the ancient Greek thinkers, in a kind of like dialectical fashion, if you are taught to question and answer and question and answer, and you bring that training to a conversation with ChatGPT, I think it could be useful. But it requires a kind of character that these students just don't have. They are everything that they use is as a shortcut. Like, just like people are freaking out recently about Destiny doing research through Wikipedia. Wikipedia is an incredible source. It can be great if you sort of know what you're looking for and do sort of what I've seen him do a little bit, which is read stuff, go to the citations, go read the books people are talking about, go engage in the broader conversation, but use it as a launching point. Students don't do that. Just like they don't use SparkNotes as a launching point for a better understanding of the text, they use it instead of the text, right? So all of those are examples of intellectually lazy habits that students have, that they need to be taught better habits that they don't bring to the table right now.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know then if that's a university failing, but it sounds like a failing of students, right? Is there a what could a university do to fix that in a pupil? So where at what point do we select out of that? So first of all, do we do it during admissions? If we find students like this, is there a way during admissions that we could identify this type of student, and then do we just shuffle them off, say this isn't for you, or do we place them in a path to kind of help change them and teach them and reform them, if you will? And if not admissions, at what point can we just identify this problem in a student and it kind of wean them off of these kinds of things? I want to hear from liberal professor a little bit, and then we'll go back to you, Chris. Go ahead.
Saving.
Sure. Yeah, I pretty much echo everything both in Ukerist said with regard to ChatGPT. ChatGPT is just a tool like anything else, depending on how you use it. I know some students have told me that they write their essay and they have ChatGPT be like a second eye, correcting any grammar errors or like anything that the Word document doesn't catch, or see if the arguments flow better. And I think that's fine. You can do stuff like that. But a lot of people do use ChatGPT to write their essays. I think one of the ways, I don't know if there's a way, I'll be very curious if anybody has any ideas with respect to admission. I'm going to screen for people like that. I don't know if it's possible to do. Maybe there is, I just don't know it. One of the ways that I've tried, and I know others have tried, is to, I don't know if it works or not, but hey, we give our best shot, is to tell people, listen, you are engaging in academic work. You're now becoming part of this group of people who are supposed to be held to a standard. And if you want to do good work, you got to do it yourself. And try to make them want to do the work on their own rather than rely on, well, cheating effectively to have ChatGPT write their essay. One of the funniest thing is, well, you know what's, I don't know if people like this example or not. It's a bit vulgar, but I think it's a true one. It's like, what is it like writing an original piece yourself? It's like, well, it's like a good bowel movement. You're just like very proud at the end of the day. You work hard. You had a stomachache all day, and then the night comes and you ate half a bottle of 𝕵𝖎𝖙, and boom, suddenly you're relieved and you're just really happy with the final product, I guess. It's a very crude example, but it's when you do original work, it doesn't necessarily need to be affirmed by somebody else. Sometimes you just feel proud of the work you did. If you write a piece that you work really hard on, and this is part of the addiction of academia. I don't know if Ukerist had this moments. I'm sure he has. Everybody who dedicates their entire life to this has these type of moments, which is you read a book over and over and over, and you understand everything, but there is this like little thing in the back of your head just pulling at you, saying there's something doesn't make sense here, and you can't figure it out. And then you put pen to paper, and you do it for like 2 hours, and you're just like brainstorming, and then suddenly, bam, you get it. And you feel like you have an out-of-body experience. You're riding a high for 2 weeks. You're seeing your dead grandparents and your future grandkids. You're like third eye view of everything. It's crazy. And after that, you look back on the paper once it's done, 4 years down the line, and you remember the feeling, and you're like, I want that again. That was a good feeling. I want to do that again. You can't get that if ChatGPT is doing your papers. And it's a high you always want to chase in some respect. But that's just my personal opinion by telling people that, hey, listen, you can be happy doing your own work. It might be fulfilling for you as a person rather than just for grades. Like a lot of stuff I've written, no one's ever going to look at because they're just somewhere collecting dust. But hey, at least I wrote them, so I'm kind of happy with it. It's
So I
got me to where
understand
I
what
am.
you're saying here. I get it, right? But I want to focus on something you said at the very beginning of this spiel, which is that you're telling your students and telling the people you're working with, hey, you're in academia now. There's a standard you're going to be held to. But that rings a little false, right? It does, based on the standards I've seen some of the leaders in academia fail to uphold. I'm, of course, referring to 𝕾𝖍𝖙 and her scandal recently, which, if I had to guess, isn't going to be unique, right? There are going to be, especially with the rise of AI being able to search these things faster and the digitization of everyone's papers and things like that, we are going to start seeing this happen more and more and more often, where people just in leadership positions at academia are shown to have been plagiarists straight up, right? And so I wonder, right? Like, I I guess I'm bringing this up because I'm trying to figure out where the fail points are. We all acknowledged a lot of the problems with academia. Where are these seeping in? How and what can we do to fix them? Does academia just need a cleansing of the top? Do we just need to fire everyone at the top and just kind of replace them? And how would that even work? Go ahead.
Okay, I still have to get a job, so I'm not going to say anything as radical as that. I'm not
Okay.
calling for a revolution on college campuses. If anybody from future employers is listening to me, I think that these two issues are related. That what you're describing is like how we might filter for these things. I don't think you filter for these things in the applications process. I think you should be teaching them to better habits, right? So I would prefer, obviously, if students coming out of high school were taught better habits, like if education was happening better all the way down. But once you're at university, I feel like you should have, like, the courses should be designed in a way that you are actually learning good intellectual habits. So outside of my own discipline, here's an example. One of my mentees this semester is a finance major, way outside of my field, but the program we're in has to do with trying to shape students' moral character, and so it doesn't matter what their major is. They get paired with me, and they get to talk to me about this stuff. But he's in this international finance class, and he's doing work right now that he will never have to do by hand if he ever gets into this industry. He's having to do things about currency conversions and interest rates on loans over time between countries. This is stuff that a spreadsheet will do for him if he ever does anything like this, but they're learning the concepts, like what is actually going on behind the spreadsheet when this conversion is done, so you understand rather than just think in a machine kind of fashion. That's a type of education that I think is so important. This is something part of my research has been on John Stuart Mill. He was very concerned with machine-like thinking, that the idea that you teach people to parrot rather than internalize and understand, that's robbing them of this human faculty he calls genius. And so we teach students to do that thing at our own peril. We teach them to think for themselves. Well, think for themselves with many asterisks, but you know what I mean, like grasp a concept and practice it for themselves. That's what we need to do. So for me, I want to design classes that are less, that are more bullshit proof. I want students to come in and actually be forced to sit in front of me and talk to me about the thing that they read, and if they didn't read it, it becomes clear. I want them to be, handwriting essays or anything that can, like, make it more resistant to the sorts of shortcuts. But you're right, there are so few fail points, and it leads to things like the Claudine Gay stuff, I think partially because, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this, but the people who are doing the teaching at many very good universities are not necessarily the best people to be doing that teaching. And there is a sort of disease where certain people who might be quite skillful at teaching but be a little bit ambitious get called up into sorts of leadership admin roles like what she had. So for an example, when I was in grad school, there was a professor I wanted to study with. I was very excited about him being there. He did work on the ancient Greeks and the founding fathers. And then as soon as I got to grad school, he got a job as the vice assistant dean to the provost of something or another. And so he'd never taught another class. Probably his workload was cut in half, and probably he got a raise, right? That's sort of how academia rewards certain types of ambitious people. So we lost a very good teacher for both undergrads and grads. We gained an administrator, and there was a kind of hole left. In contrast, there are other professors at other anonymous universities that I'm aware of who go through grad school at prestigious schools, like think Ivy League schools. And if you get into certain programs with, a certain track record from, say, an Ivy undergrad, you might be on fellowship the entire time you're there, which means you are not necessarily required to teach ever. So you can go through a PhD program in 5 to 6 years, never teach a class, and if you're coming out of an Ivy League, you're going to get a job at a very good school, like a Big Ten school or a flagship state school, and you might walk into a classroom full of 300 undergraduates never having taught a class. And so I would suggest that those types of people are not the best people to be educating our students oftentimes. They might make amazing researchers, and they do, but being a good researcher and being a good teacher are not always the same thing. This is also part of the mission confusion of the university, that the same people who are very good at doing very specialized research aren't necessarily the person you want teaching your chemistry class, right? Anyways, that was so all of this is tied. I think you have a system that incentivizes certain people to step into administrative roles as quickly as they can, or off the backs of like ambition and high output without much thought to quality. And I think you also have a system that tends to slot people in who may not be the best teachers into that role where we need to teach the students those intellectual habits that they're missing. Yeah.
Yes. So I would echo a lot of things that Ukerist said. The idea of the emphasis on research and Ivy League schools, I've actually heard this story. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've actually heard that some schools that are focused on teaching never hire Ivy League PhDs because they know they can't teach. They are really, really, really excellent researchers. And I don't want to knock Ivy League schools down. They work their students to the bone, but just to do research. Like the amount of research, this is why they're Ivy League. The amount of research that comes out of those schools are insane. This is why for the United States, a lot of people, when they think of United States as a superpower, they think of military. But one of the biggest point in case for United States supremacy over everybody else is the amount of knowledge that is just coming out of the States. It's crazy. All of the Ivy League schools, I think out of the top 10 universities, 7 or 8 of them are in the state. It's crazy how much knowledge output there are, but you can't get there if you don't work your student to the bone.
How
And the primary focus is on research.
how much of
Sorry, go on.
that in the research field? Let's talk about that for a minute since you brought it up. How much of that is like a lagging behind effect, right? At least in the culture in America. I can't speak for Canada, but for America, trust in Ivy League institutions, the prestige of Ivy League institutions has gone down the toilet, down the drain. And in my opinion, as a layman, of course, it's for a very good reason. You speak of research. Recently, there was that whole kerfuffle with the Alzheimer's research. Do you remember that? Most of it was made up. Then you have cancer research coming out of Harvard. Harvard. Most of it some of the foundational parts of it were just falsified, made up. And we're seeing, again, more and more of this. So when we talk about these things about United States being a superpower where a large amounts of research and how these people are excellent researchers, I don't know if I believe you, frankly, because I see what goes in and what makes you successful, at least from the outside looking in at these places. And it's not your research capabilities. It's not that, right? It's your ability to put out a bunch of stuff, right, to get published, and also your adherence to whatever culture happens to be in that institution. And that seems to be it. Now, how am I wrong? Please show me the error of my ways here. And $10 before you do that from Temperance Quill. Given that many go to college not for the academia but for the job they are promised at the end of the road, would one solution be to separate job training in universities from legitimate academia? So answer that question and also kind of tell me why I'm wrong here. Go ahead.
Yes, that is one solution. I'm not sure I fully favor it. As liberal professor said earlier, I think it is possible. It takes a good school to do it, but I think it's very possible to combine the kind of like technical, skill-based professional training that you get in maybe upper-level specialized courses with a more general education that you find in like a core curriculum. I think a problem that we have now is that most schools, their breadth requirements or gen ed requirements are entirely scatterbrained. There's no consistency, no rhyme or reason to any of it, almost entirely up to the choice of the student rather than actually doing the work of the education that we're talking about. But you're right that what is rewarded is sort of like high research output, and then citations is another thing that's a big deal. And so this is what happens with this medical research is when you have hot button medical research, it as soon as it's pre-published and then as soon as it's peer-reviewed published, people are already citing it. And so that's generating buzz, it's generating hype. It looks very good. So you want to rush that stuff out as quickly as you can, keep building on the research that you're doing. I made a list of these scandals to like go through and look at in depth, because some of them are like some of them are not as consequential to the conclusions as others, where it's like, you know, what's happened is like plagiarizing image scans or something like that, but there's still some like foundational research that was done that's useful, so things like that. But I would say to Wick, consider like, yes, several prominent things have happened. Stanford, Harvard, some Ivy League, some top ranked institutions outside the Ivies. But also think of just the number of, like, just go look on the Wikipedia list right now of Research One universities and how many of those there are in the United States, how many departments are at each of those universities, how many professors are employed by each of those departments, and the amount of research that they're publishing. The scandals are, like, they're truly troubling. Like, they never should have happened, and we should have had checks that never allowed it to get there. But the volume of output that is really good quality, as liberal professor was saying, is kind of overwhelming when you just kind of break it down.
Yeah, that's very true. And the solution that the $10 chatter suggested, it can work for sure. But I think it's also important for the engineers and the architect and other tradespeople to also get a liberal education, because it's good for the soul if you want to get really, really hippie about it. But it's true. Insofar as the problem of cheating goes in academia and plagiarism, yeah, it's a big issue, and we are catching them more and more. This is not also the problem, as Ukerist said, the output, but also in academia we also have a clout in a way. It's not just about how much you publish; it's about where you publish. And 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙 had publication in some very, very reputable. I think Oxford University Press published her co-authored book, which is a really, really, really prestigious press. So if you can publish there, you effectively, some academics, like for example Alexander Wendt, they publish one book and they become effectively the golden boy of the entire international politics, because that one book everybody reads and is published by a very, very important publisher. So it's also the clout issue. Then people try to get that prestigious publication to read their work and accept it. And yeah, there are different types of plagiarism as well. There's degree to it for sure. We always have those students, for example, that just copy everything from Wikipedia and don't cite anything and then present it as their own. But then there are people who are just doing a bad citation. So these two plagiarism are not on the same level, for sure. But the amount of publication that some of these Ivy League schools require from their students is astronomical. So to be able to do that, I'm not surprised that a lot of cheatings are coming out, because it's just inhumane how much they demand, which is understandable because they're in a very competitive area. Like if you're going to Harvard, you're going to Princeton, these are really prestigious schools, and they don't want to lose that prestige because there's an Ivy League school behind them that's trying to take their place. So they're gonna be like, yeah, you gotta put out some research, my guy. If you can't, then there's the door. You just charge you a bunch of money for it, but hey, you couldn't cut it. So that's another problem with academia, in my opinion, is that it sometimes can be a very toxic environment with regard to especially publication. I don't know if Ukerist had this experience, but I've known some people who have had this experience when they send an article to a journal, and maybe the article is not very good. Maybe it has requirements to fix it. Maybe there's some things that they miss, but they get responses like, this person shouldn't even write in academia. They should go back to 10th grade. And I'm like, bro, really chill out. What's going on here? I had a professor. I knew somebody, the professor this happened to. He sent an article to a very reputable journal, and the journal reviewer get back to him and said, you should read Professor X before writing this article. Professor X was the one who submitted the article. He's like, you should read your own work. And he didn't know because these are blind reviews. And he's like, are you serious? Like, some of the comments are just vicious. And the academic environment can be very, very toxic, which furthers the problem of output, because if you don't want to be targeted by the hostility, you got to be a big name, or I guess you can say an online environment, you got to have clout. And how do you get clout? You get published, you get cited, and you get published in very prestigious journals.
Yeah, if you guys have seen Whiplash, the life of being a PhD student at a top 10 university and the life of being a tenure track assistant professor at an Ivy League is sort of like Whiplash, where you are killing yourself dedicated to the job. Like there's this churning cycle. Almost every year, some Ivy League will post a tenure track job for an entry level professor, an assistant professor, and almost everyone knows that those jobs, the people who get them will almost never get tenure at those institutions because their tenure requirements are so high. So it's a sort of launching pad. They're going to publish their asses off, try to get tenure, won't get it, and then they'll go get a job at some, big state school or something like that. But it's a miserable place for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's another issue. Again, this hasn't happened to me. This is what I've heard from some colleagues. So this is word of mouth. Take it with a grain of salt, however you so will. I've heard that some new graduate students that go to some conferences, they have a discussion with some professors or scholars they really like, their work they really like, and they talk about their own ideas and try to get some critical feedback. Only 3 years down the line to see that said professor publish an article with their ideas in it, which they just talked about. And you're like, okay, how do you prove that? So I don't know if this is true or not. I've heard stories. Again, I have been lucky enough to be blessed with a lot of very good mentors, with a lot of really good teachers, and a lot of really good colleagues. So I haven't had that experience. But apparently it's enough common that I've heard some people say it happens. And you can't really prove it. How do you prove word of mouth?
Yeah, I'm absolutely. And even then, right? Like, I'm gonna give some grace here. I'm gonna steel man the professor who would do something like this. They're at a function, right? They're getting approached all the time. Someone says something that sparks an idea in them. It's a good idea, right? And they're like, oh, that's really cool. They don't remember whoever they're talking to, right? A few years down the road, they're like, it leads them down paths, right, of research, of questioning, of study that leads to a very, very similar place. I don't know if that's stealing, so to speak. It would be as if we had a conversation. If all of us sat down, we were drinking, and we had a conversation, and because of that conversation, the ideas I gained and the influences that you guys had on me, I went on and had a show on that. And then you came to me later and said, "You stole my idea." Did I steal it, or was it just kind of this free flowing
Yeah.
thing? I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
It can be the case. That's certainly true. I would say this. I personally, what I've seen some people do, I don't know if this is common practice. Maybe Ukerist can speak to this more, but I've seen some people when they go to conferences, but this is exclusive for their own paper. So yeah, you might be right, Wick. In certain respects, some people might just forget that they had that conversation. But I've seen some people in their article say something like, this argument was due to fruitful discussion with this and this person. And you might not remember, but like, I talked to these couple of people, and you know what? They had some influence on my thoughts, and I had a conversation, and this is the product. In a way, you're paying. They're not really cited in a proper sense, I guess, but you're saying, hey, listen, they were there. They had a
Sure, you're
hand in it in some way,
crediting
shape, or form.
them at least for
Yeah,
part. No, that seems like probably a good thing to do if you can remember it, right? But
yeah,
I know, like for example, when I went to Ohio, right? I talked to dozens and dozens of people. I don't know all their names, man. Like I couldn't tell you. But some of the conversations were very interesting, and I'm sure it influenced me in one way or another. Not that I'm going to steal any of their ideas. I don't know if they actually gave me any ideas, but I'm just trying to put myself in these people's shoes and trying to figure out, okay, well, how would I act, or how would a reasonable person act in this kind of situation?
yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely right. This could be a very not harmless, I should say,
Sure.
because it can be harmful, and I'll get to that in a sec. It could be a very genuine like mistake. But sometimes, like I said, some scholars are built on one idea. That's their golden ticket. And once they get that, they got a job lined up. If that's your golden ticket and somebody by accident takes it and now you have nothing as a new graduate student who doesn't have any publications, oh man, best of luck to you. This is going to be rough,
Yeah.
buddy.
Yeah, this is very niche advice that won't be useful probably to anybody listening, but this is my advisor in grad school. We started co-authoring a paper right away, and then I also had some other work, and he's basically said, develop a habit, as you present papers, as you have conversations, like try to, in your running document, keep like a running acknowledgement section basically of the people you do talk to, because for some people, this is like a huge deal. Like if it's not even like that you stole my idea, it's like not even giving me a nod that I like contributed, give you good feedback, that can be, some people are very academia attracts personalities that take things very personally sometimes. So yeah, you just have to develop good habits to maintain a good reputation.
Speaking of the personalities academia tracks, right? Let's talk about the women problem, or more correctly, the lack of men problem. Um, I I'm curious. So Eucharist has rightly mentioned that we don't actually know, right? We're all kind of just supposing, right? Guessing, kind of speculating, if you will. But I'm curious if the liberal professor had any theories on this. I'm just really curious. One, is this happening in Canada too? And
Yes.
two, what are some of the causes that you think are leading to men both not enrolling in academia as much as they used to, as well as failing in academia at record rates? Go ahead.
So this is again I haven't really delved too deep into the research on this. So what I'm about to say, I want to caveat by saying it's an opinion. And so if you're gonna cite me later, don't. But on that note, I would say there's a pretty new phenomenon that I guess the enrollment in Canada with respect to women and men, women were generally since 2000, I think, have been enrolling more than men in universities. But it's been in the past year that the enrollment of men have been declining. So I think that would probably one of the difference. Again, I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but that was the last time I looked at it. That could have changed. And so far, why it's happening, it feels, and I do mean feels like, that a lot of academic disciplines are not appealing to a lot of like the male gender, I guess you could say, because it's just doesn't speak to some of their concerns, I guess. Like you said, a lot of guys who go to universities, they see it as as a way to get a job at the end of the day, whether they like the job or not. I see a lot of engineers who, who are bound to get a good job, but every Saturday they go to a bar and then come out Sunday night. They just don't want to be home. They just want to party it out all night because they just don't want to deal with the Mondays. So it could be that it's just not pleasant to them. In my own personal experience, one thing that I've seen is that men in general seem to be very hyper focused on one particular issue, and they excel at that one issue, and then they suddenly fall off in other issues. So what I mean by that is this: when I'm teaching something, and generally speaking, when female students, I'm talking to them, they're very well rounded. I can have a lot of discussions with them on the issues, and it's very nice and pleasant. When I talk to a male student, it really depends if they find the issue interesting or not. And if they do find the issue interesting, that's the one issue they can talk about for hours. If it doesn't interest them at all, it's like pulling 7 teeth at once. It's just not possible to engage with male students on the topic they're not interested in. The interest just falls off the cliff. I don't know what's going on, but if they're interested, they'll never stop talking about it. But if they're not interested, it's impossible to talk to them about it. Whereas with female students, they are genuinely try to engage, and they try to be a well-rounded conversations about the issue. And I never have a problem with the conversation method about the educational things that we're talking about in that sense. But with guys, it really depends. So that might be one of the reasons why their numbers are declining, because they're just losing interest.
First of all, have you had a similar experience, Ukerist, in that respect? And
I would
just
say
before you answer,
Oh,
I'm
yes,
sorry, $10 from Temperance Quill. Thank you for the money, gang. And gang, I can't do this for free. Give me more of your money. Super chats, gift subs, bits, all that really helps me. Pay me what you think I'm worth. Okay, $10 from Temperance Quill.
please fund. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Curious what they think about divorcing sports from universities. Seems a useless investment for an institution that's supposed to be devoted to teaching and research.
I'm gonna give that completely to you, Chris. We don't do sports in colleges and universities like America. You guys have a very religious perspective on religion, on sports in universities, which is just very bizarre. Like university football, basketball, like in Canada, we don't have that kind of like vigor. So that's all Ukerist.
Sure, go ahead.
So for the male thing, yeah, I mean, I would say my general experience has been that I think my classroom experience reflects the data, which is there's a slight edge among my female students in their just attention paid and their academic success. They're they have multicolored notebooks and highlighters and sticky notes and have a note-taking system and come to office hours and actually do study guides and things like that, where it's much more common in my experience anecdotally, but at this point that's well over 1,000 students, I think, that the men are more just checked out. They're looking at their phones, they're talking to their buddies in the back corner or something like that. But again, it's marginal, right? So it's like just like the average stats are like women are this many percentage of men are failing out compared to women. It's like a 10 to 15% difference between them. So it's like, of course, there's excellent students and poor students on all sides. If I had to guess, I'd say it just sort of reflects the data. And as far as like why it happens, the only research I've been able to find on this, some of it's in psychology, some of it's in education, but there are suggestions that basically the way we do certain things at the K through 12 level has some negative impacts on young men. That the way students are taught from a young age to practice things like self-control in the classroom is sort of disproportionately harming the more active young boys who are then held back years or missed classes or academically underperforming where they could be. And so, I mean, I think that research is out there. As far as I can tell, it's kind of inconclusive. Everybody right now is shrugging like, why is this happening? Who knows? Could be this, could be that. Yeah, it is a little distressing, I think, obviously, because like when we see, one group of people being negatively impacted disproportionately at an institution or getting into an institution, usually we think that's something to be remedied somewhere along the line. I don't know if that's through
Well,
policy or just activity or
the
something,
reason
but
the reason that it gives me pause is not so much the percentages, but the trends, right?
yeah.
It is diving down, right? Diving down. The theories I have heard, and I'm curious of what your thoughts on there. One of the big theories that kind of I resonate with a little bit is that there's a multitude of programs and scholarships and grants and other funding to get women into sciences, to get women into fields of education that they traditionally haven't been in. Right there, if you are a woman and you want to get into higher education, you have that resource. Like even in Canada, like as the liberal professor said, for an international student, funding is an issue, right? And so if you are a woman, you just have more access to that. As far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, for men, they don't have that same amount of support structure there. That there just isn't the types of grants and programs and things to get men in. At least not that I'm aware of. So I wonder if it, especially with the rising cost of education and the cost benefit ratio of attending a university for years and years and years, it just, when men make that calculation, it just, again, more of them just can't.
Yeah.
What do we think of this? Is there anything to that, or is it just kind of a? Am I wrong in my fundamentals here? Are there a lot of grants out there for men that I'm just not aware of?
I don't think so. Well, I mean, I think the typical line, if you have the sort of older school feminist position on this, is that all of the grants are typically for men because men are disproportionately being awarded them, and so the ones that are specifically for women are making up that distance. But that doesn't really seem to be true anymore. It seems like we've gone past the point of parity and almost overcorrected. But the things I've been reading on it suggest that it's not just that, like, we still have incentive programs for women. It's just that, like, men are sort of dropping off. It's not that we really overcorrected. It's that something is causing these men to just not pursue college or to do badly at college. So maybe it has to do with, like, support while you're there. You don't feel like there's specific programs for you. I was looking inside Chronicle of Higher Education has this, like, PDF explainer on the male enrollment crisis, and they actually note that there are a few universities now that have opened up men's resource center. The University of Oregon is one of them. So if you go look at their resources for disadvantaged groups on campus, here's the LGBTQ center, here's the Black student center, and here's the men's resource center is listed with them. So it exists. That support structures are being they're popping up in response to the crisis. As far as the sports thing, I see somebody in chat saying that, like, the sports fund everything else at the university. That's not entirely true. This is a little bit old data, but according to the NCAA in 2019, out of the 65 autonomy schools in Division I, only 25 recorded a positive net generated revenue in 2019, but that doesn't always factor in all things like alumni donations and such. I think sports in general is not it's a long and complicated topic, but I think student athletes are very rarely both students and athletes. There's a clear focus on the athlete's part that it doesn't really fit the mission of my ideal university, but there's no change in it at this point.
Thoughts, liberal professor, please.
Insofar as, international, I think, I don't know if I misspoke or not, as international students pay a lot more than domestic students and such. But insofar as the issue of men in university is concerned, again, I can't disprove the theory because I haven't looked at the theory in detail, and I can't prove it either. It certainly could be true that because of the incentives, but I feel like a lot of male students feel like the university just isn't a good environment for them.
What does that mean?
It means that they are, like you said, it could be because of a career prospect. They think, okay, why would I go to a university and get a political science degree or a sociology degree or an engineering degree when I can go get a carpentry, go into carpentry, get the training for 6 months, and then go work for a couple of years, get my red seal, and bam, I can make more money than an engineer can. It's certainly possible that they think that the universities as a whole have become the mode of their teaching is very outdated for attention, for regard to people's attention span, and maybe it hasn't just caught up with the technology. One of the things that I hated, and this is again my personal experience. Also, I would echo what Ukerist said with regard to female students coming to office hours, that the ratio in my office hours is also 7-3 at least. 7 female to every 3 male that come to my office hours asking me questions. So yeah, that's they probably losing interest because the environment isn't proper for them either. Like one of the classes that I was teaching, I don't know if you had this experience, Ukerist, but oh my God, this was such a terrible experience. I had 300 students, and the room had no windows, no clocks. All the chairs were squished together, and the room was so small. At least 20 of my students were sitting on the what you call it, stairs, and it was such a bizarre thing. And I'm like, why would you assign this room for a first or second year course where you have 200, 300 students? And it was just so, it was like a prison. And I mean, I love the Greeks, but if you tell me you have to sit in this room 2 hours every week, read the Greeks, I'll be like, no, thank you. I'm good on that. Like, this is just such a terrible, terrible place. The environment is not conducive to learning in that sense. It's like a factory. You're putting students in, packing them in a classroom like sardines so you can have more and more students. This is also another issue in academia, is that they're having more and more students in classroom, and the classroom sizes are becoming bigger, and people just feel like numbers. And there's no interpersonal relationships anymore with respect to like the material that is being taught that connect the professors to the students. You're just a number, and that can be very off-putting as well. It's just not a very, in a lot of ways, it's not a healthy environment. I was, again, it was me being lucky in a lot of ways, but from some perspectives, I was not lucky. But in this sense, I think I was. I went to a small university for my undergrad, and that was a blessing because in our 4th year, we had about like 5 to 10 people. And that was great because the professors knows all of us by names. We know each other, and we can like discuss ideas, and we all kind of push each other in a way. And we don't always have to be in a small little closet to read. We could go outside. We could, if it's Canada, this was northern Canada, so you can't always go outside, but when you can, it's nice. We have trees. We have one tree that's not frozen. It's kind of nice. We can go look at that and read Plato. And I've seen this happen also with some smaller schools that are popping up in the United States, where they're trying to push that type of model, which can attract a lot of male students, maybe, where they have to go and in a smaller classrooms discuss ideas, and it's more of a conversational approach rather than let me talk at you. Here's a power slide, go memorize them, come in 3 months and write me an essay kind of thing. There's that interpersonality. There's a human element, I would say, in universities, that in classrooms, that first year and second year students are kind of missing out on because it's just so massive.
I want to talk about it's semi-related to this. I don't know if it's connected directly, but well, I'll get your thoughts on it. So it is it's almost an article of faith among the right these days, at least in America, to say that universities are leftists' propaganda factories churning out soy, woke, snowflake, SJWs, and that a proper conservative can't ever get a real chance, that they're hostile to conservatives. Is there any truth to that?
I don't. Ukerist, do you want to go, or do you want me to go first?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. So if you, I don't know, I might be ranting for a while. If you want to go,
I can make it brief for my part. I don't think it's entirely true. I can understand why that is, because there's a lot of administrators and such that are on TV and are always being pushed as this like leftist approach. Here's my opinion. A lot of this is, again, I don't know if I'm like letting any cats out of the bags or anything, but I feel like a lot of people who are tenured and a lot of people who are at administration, and this was also the case with pretty much everybody that's higher positions, that they just don't want to rock the boat. So they go with whatever is most convenient to smooth things out. and whatever the cultural norms of that time is, at least as they perceive it to be. So they can't like say, okay, whatever, who do I have to shake hands with so I can go back into my cubicle and read for the next 8 hours? That's all I want. And I mean, if that's the culture of the time and that's where the social, I guess, I don't know what you would call it, but social pressures are pushing, then they might view it. But I would say that a good scholar's job, and sorry, a good teacher's job is not to produce a bunch of mini-me's. You're not supposed to think like me. In fact, when I love Plato, so I keep going to the Greeks, my apologies. But Plato Republic, I think, is one of the best books to read for any undergrad that is first year and then fourth year, because you can look at it in two very different perspectives. The first time somebody reads the book, Plato is going on about this perfect state. This is great. You can do all this and this and this. And as you read through it, well, there is like issues with like rulership. And he's like, okay, we're just gonna exile whoever is a poet and doesn't like us. I go, okay, so that's not very good. He goes, yeah, well, we're at it. We're gonna have lots with regard to who you can marry, because who knows, maybe your soul is made of gold and the other one is bronze, and you don't want the bronze to get together. You want the golds to get together. I said, well, that's not very good either. It's like, well, the families, we're just gonna abolish them altogether. And it keeps going more and more extreme. And it's like, by the end of the book, it's like, is this a good regime? And I think a job of a good scholar is to say, look at things critically. Like, this is the beauty of being in that situation. You can look at it from two different perspectives. The first years read it and they just read it and go, okay, so this is what Plato thinks. He wants a utopia. The fourth years go, wait a minute, now that we have a little bit more training, we can look at it a little bit differently. So this kind of shows that you're not supposed to be just whatever the professor is. You're supposed to be thinking for yourself. You're supposed to become somebody who is you, I guess you could say, if you want to use a more authentic you.
You say that, but in my admittedly limited and admittedly long ago experience, you got better marks if you agreed with the teacher.
That is one of the problems of not teaching enough or being good teachers. That's absolutely one of the biggest problems. I would agree with you. That's not a good thing. I had students who would disagree with I never try to. This is one of the things that I try not to do. I try never to give the students what I think about the text. And some of them have asked me, and my response is always, I have thoughts. And I just leave it at, I have thoughts. I have many thoughts. I think a lot. But I never tell them what I think, because I want them to think on their own. And one of the other things that I like to do is to always point out that Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, the three of them were teachers and students in consecutively, but they all disagree with each other. Like not all of them agreed. So you are free to think for yourself. And if I'm a good teacher, that should be my mission. My mission should be to make you you. And if you're going to be a conservative, I want you to be an informed conservative. Why are you a conservative? If you're a liberal, I want you to know why you are a liberal. If you're progressive, you have to be able to give an argument to why you are the way you are. And if you can't do that, then something has severely gone wrong. You got to go back to the drawing board and figure it out.
That's what we're here talking about, the things that have severely gone wrong. Toby makes a statement in my chat that I want to echo because it's true. Don't upstage your professor. I think Ukerist mentioned this earlier. I think it was Ukerist that mentioned that for whatever reason, academia attracts personalities that take things personally. I think that's related to that. If you make the professor look bad or foolish or wrong, it's not going to go well for you. Even if you're right, even if you're doing it from a stance of, I have just opened the door on this and I have discovered something great about a work or a thing, and it puts my professor to shame, don't do it. Never do it. Not in public, not until you're gone and they're not your professor anymore, because it's going to be a problem. This isn't just in academia, of course, but I've seen it a lot. Anyway, go ahead, Ukerist. You have a rant. You have a lot of thoughts. Snowflakes, SJWs, and all the things we've talked about. Go ahead.
Snowflakes all the way down. Now, I do actually try to make it very intentional in my classes. Like when students will ask me questions that I just genuinely do not know the answer to, because we teach similar books, right? When you're teaching an ancient text, you can know about it, you can have been reading it for a long time, and you can understand more than the students do, but they will ask you some random historical question that will stump you. And if you just try to BS when they have their laptops in front of you, it's not going to go well. So I try to make sure that my students do know that I will occasionally say things that are just factually wrong, and if you correct me, I will be happy to receive it. But that's not the norm. Okay, so conservatives in university as a persecuted minority. It is just true, actually, that academia is heavily weighted to the left, more to the left than the average American, more to the left than the average public opinion poll. The questions really are, what are the reasons for that and what are the consequences of that? Right? Is it because conservatives are just dumb, and when you become educated, you become more liberal, which is true, by the way. It's a good predictor of moving more towards the center or towards the left is higher education levels. Is it because conservatives are just dumb, or is there some sort of active campaign of persecution? Is it that if you have certain things on your CV, certain professors, certain institutions, that you won't get hired? Is it because conservatives are self-selecting out of academia and not going to college or not going into grad school? The real answer is some like mishmash combination of all of these things, I think. I think liberal professors, right, that most university admins are not these crazy activist Marxists. They just don't want to rock the boat. They want things kind of going their own way. The craziest people at university are going to be your education professors and your sociology professors, and nobody likes them anyways. So like the idea that they have some sort of like great grand influence over the culture of the university such that any given conservative student is just going to be relentlessly picked on is kind of a fantasy out of like God's Not Dead or something like that. But it is a grand conservative tradition to rant about the liberal university all the way back to the 50s with William F. Buckley's God and Man at Yale. It has been a strong conservative tradition to say these godless universities are teaching us the bad things and indoctrinating students. The thing about indoctrination is that I wish I could indoctrinate my students. I just want my students to do the reading, much less, come to agree with me. The idea that I get to have some sort of like, fingers in their brain ability to shape them into like little, in my case, conservative robots is just silly to me. But all that to say, I do think there is some evidence that, yes, conservatives do self-select out of academia a decent amount, and you have stupid conservatives like Ben Shapiro who tell people not to go to school at all, and I think those people are bad and dumb and wrong, just like Marco Rubio when he got up on stage in the presidential debates and said we need more plumbers and fewer philosophers. Don't go study philosophy. Like, just shut up, dude. You're just ridiculous. But also, it is true that there are certain organizations that you can take money from as a grad student or as a professor that are a black mark in academia. People will not like you very much. These are things associated with the Koch network or the Liberty network or things like this that some people in certain hiring committees will look disfavorably on. And so I think it just will happen that, yeah, if you are of a certain conservative bent, like, it's going to have some consequences for your career. But, that's just something you've got to know, eyes open going in. So there's a really good book on this. It's kind of old at this point because every year it's another year, but it's published in 2016. It's called Passing on the Right, Conservative Professors in the Progressive University. Of course, the title is a sort of innuendo or euphemism, I suppose, where it's like, there's passing on the right as in a car, but also here are a bunch of conservative professors who in some instances feel the need to try to, pass as normie centrists or liberals, like some people try to pass as white or what have you. They interviewed over 100 conservative professors that are anonymized in the book, just basically about their own experiences. They track some other data, and they find some really interesting and counterintuitive things. One is that when persecution of conservative students has happened, it tends to drive students more conservative. So there's several cases of students who were like made to do some political assignment in class they didn't agree with. The professor gave them a bad grade. They went and protested it, and now this student is some like wacky activist somewhere, right? So it's not like the liberal professors are turning your kids into communists with their political indoctrination. They're just pissing them off and making them worse conservatives. But all of these professors do report certain, cultural and academic negatives that come from being either a known or an unknown conservative. They feel like they have to hide their views. They don't always feel like they have the freedom to publish what they want, etc. So very good book if you want to get an idea of like what I think the most intelligent people talking about this have said about that topic. In general, I just don't like the fear-mongering, but the fear-mongering happens partially because it's a really good fundraising mechanism. When the crazy students show up outside your event and protest, you get to send that out in your marketing email to all your old conservative donors.
Let's
and
talk
they are
about
going to
the
give
crazy
you...
students
Yeah.
protesting outside your events.
Can I tell you a story of
You
one
may
particular
tell
one?
us the story, and then
Oh,
we'll dig into this. Go ahead. I want to hear the story.
so my time at a very very liberal university, by the way, in grad school, was not as crazy as I expected. But there was one particular incident that was very funny. We an organization I was working with was co-sponsoring an event with YAL or YAF or some dumb undergrad conservative organization to bring out a journalist, 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜, who writes for Town Hall Media. She's openly conservative, openly pro-gun, all these things. And she was going to talk about how she thought the solution to the sexual assault crisis on college campuses was women carrying firearms. Which I fully, full openness. I like guns, but that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard because most sexual assault on college campuses is happening in environments where there's alcohol, and this just is not a good mix. Wouldn't
Alcohol
want,
and guns? That
yeah,
sounds like a
don't,
good time. Hell
yeah.
yeah, let's go.
So I didn't. Her talk was not my favorite. I didn't agree with everything, but I was interested to hear it. But this organization that started in Texas and has spread around the country since is called Cocks Not Glocks. And so what they do is they show up at pro-gun speakers' talks and wave around and give out free dildos, just because. And so that was they were just weird. And so she was coming into the venue, and they basically just like surrounded her and waved a bunch of dildos in her face. And so the best part of her talk was she got up there at the beginning of her speech and pulled out of her pocket her phone and read the university's sexual harassment policy that said sexual harassment is any unwanted blah 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 blah, exactly what had just happened to her. And she's just like, I want you to consider how you all would react if the roles were reversed and a progressive woman was coming here to speak on a progressive feminist topics and a bunch of conservative male students were outside waving penises in her face. Like, what would you think about that? I thought that was great. So yes, sometimes that stuff happens. It's just not the norm. You get crazy people everywhere.
I would, if I may, also say something with regard to the conservative students and such. I am a fundamental believer that pressure makes diamonds a lot of times. So having conservatives and liberals in a room arguing with each other is a great way for people to hone their skills and hone their thinking ability to understand themselves better and make their own minds and make their foundation of their own thought more concrete. This is very important, something that if everybody thinks the same, you're never going to get a contrary thought. So you might have a wrong, this is Mill, classic Mill. If nobody ever criticizes you, you never know if you were right or wrong. You just presume you were always right. That is not always the case. And I think the important point that conservatives can play and liberals can have a role in as well is to push each other back and forth. One of my favorite books is by a really, really staunch conservative by the name of, who's an academic in Notre Dame called Patrick J. Deneen. And his book is Why Liberalism Failed. It's my favorite book because I disagree with him on pretty much every single thing that he says as to why liberalism failed, but he makes an eloquent and interesting arguments. And I think the arguments are important and worth responding to. It's important to discuss some of them, maybe even all of them, in a genuinely way because we want liberalism as a whole, as a regime, to become better. And I'm not the only one who thinks that, because at the back of the book, there is a little known person that wrote an endorsement of the book you might have heard of called Barack Obama, who also said this book is really, really important for liberals. And I agree, but not because it's endorsing liberalism, because it's critiquing liberalism in a very fundamental way that liberals who, like me, who like someone like John Rawls, who is the godfather of liberalism in a lot of ways, have to respond to. We have to be able to take up the challenge and say, yeah, sure, these are good critiques, but here's our responses. And then there'll be a back and forth. That's the core of what academic
I understand that this
critical
is
thinking
kind of
should
like
be.
the aspiration, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of like what you would think about in an old-timey movie of the liberals and the conservatives in the classroom get together and they both make each other better. But at least and this doesn't just happen in academia, I want to be clear, right? This just happens especially in workplaces and more and more often it seems nowadays, and that could just be a feels thing, to be clear, right? One side will gain institutional power or pressure or leverage of some sort, and instead of taking up that challenge and like the pressure makes diamonds type of thing, they'll be like, nah, get out, right? And we're going to use our leverage and pressure to get you out, right? We saw this after the October 7th incident where there were a lot of protests about the Israel bombing Gaza, right? And there all sorts of incidents occurred, right? And instead of trying to engage with each other, both sides tried to expel each other, right? This happens in the workplace. I can talk about personal experiences here, right? Where, again, instead of engaging with different ideas, it's either A, shut down entirely, which in a workplace makes more sense, right? But it does not make sense in academia, at least to me. Or they're like, I don't feel safe here, and they leverage that to get rid of that. And this isn't a right thing, this isn't a left thing, this is just a thing. But given that, again, as Ukerist acknowledged, it's just true that academia has a leftward bent. I worry and I wonder that you're telling us a nice story, liberal professor, just doesn't seem to work.
I
It
will say.
doesn't. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, please. He was talking to you, so you respond. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. It doesn't work at the moment. You're right, Wick, and I'm not gonna sit here and delusion line and say no, we are all getting together and we are all singing kumbaya and our disagreement comes to like minor issues. No, we have like fundamental worldview issues. But I think this is also part of the failing of academia, academics and academia. This is our time to come in and go, no, we need to have sober dialogues about this. And in a way, this is kind of our failures as well, because we are, I don't know how else to say this, but it stinks of cowardice to some extent, because this is the time that people need to come together and start having like some sober dialogues, and academia need to facilitate that. But we are not. And as a result, by the way, academia is suffering. You said there is a lack of trust in academic institution. That's not by accident, because the sentiment you just proposed is what a lot of people feel. And that's something that needs to be remedied. And that can be remedied until academia and academics effectively put on their big boy pants on and go, okay, we need to discuss this seriously. And one of the things that I don't know, a lot of people talk about public intellectuals, and the public intellectual itself in academia is rather controversial from time to time. But some people are like, oh, look, there are so many crazy public intellectuals, and they point to a bunch of internet PhDs and say, see, these are all intellectuals. And this is true, there are public intellectuals. But what they don't see is that it's 5 or 6 PhDs that are public intellectual. Where are the rest of the intellectuals? Where are the rest of the PhDs? The reason for it is because, well, again, it goes back to they don't want to rock the boat. And one of the things that they are trying to do is to sit in their room, read books, and that's their career goals. So coming and giving public talks, like, for example, someone like Chomsky does, or Zizek does, or Jordan Peterson does, these are not things that is conducive to a long and prosperous academic career. These are good things for public intellectuals to do because they already made it. But for every Jordan Peterson or every Zizek or every whatever your favorite public intellectual is, there is 10,000 other academics who are, well, they don't want to come out and talk. Sorry,
Yeah.
Chris. Yeah.
No, it's fine.
Uh-oh. Gang, am I still up? Hello? Can you get... Oh,
Yeah.
I'm good? Okay, you all froze. So anything you just said, Ukerist?
No, that's okay.
No, I don't know.
Okay, that's all right.
Try
I'll
again.
start
again.
again.
I think we're back.
Academia fails again.
Yeah. I think you're right, Wick, that these things don't work out in the idealistic way that we want them to. And part of that is because, like, well, there just aren't that many actual conservatives running around on college campuses to participate in those conversations. Now, there are people who would sort of disagree with that. They'll say things that, like, academia in general has like a conservative bent in the sense that it's traditional, it's institutional, blah blah blah. That's vaguely true, but it's only true in a kind of trivial sense. It's not like the people that are there actually have conservative politics in the way we want to have those sorts of conversations. And so I think for an important first step is finding some way to get conservatives back into those institutions, which requires more conservatives actually participating in them, but also requires some intentional effort on the part of the institutions to address potential biases. I won't go so far as to say like attempt to make up that ground, because that sounds like I'd be advocating for affirmative action for conservatives, which would be probably more controversial than I want to get into here. But at the very least, try to make it so that having a fellowship with a conservative coded organization is not a black mark on your CV in the hiring process. Would probably be one important step. But what's happened instead right now is that conservatives, or at least, cranky centrists or right-leaning people, are segmenting and siloing off where they can. So they do take money from places like the Koch Foundation, and they use that money to establish centers and institutes that are non-discriminatory towards their ideas, and they'll use it to fund their research. And they do great work there. They get a lot of flack for being, ideological or what have you, but they do a lot of interesting and good work there. But what's happening also now is that a bunch of state universities are using state money to start new centers and institutes for civic education. And those are getting staffed by people who for a while have sort of been outside the academic norm, because if you have somebody who's underemployed with a PhD in American politics teaching the founding fathers, the chances that person is slightly conservative are kind of high. And so places like UT Austin, places like University of Tennessee, places like several universities in Ohio, our Hamilton Center at University of Florida are opening these new institutes for basically American constitutional education. And I think those are going to be places where you're going to see genuine intellectual diversity, because they're not just hiring conservatives, despite what anybody tells you, but they are hiring people who have a genuine intellectual curiosity that are bringing something valuable that's currently missing at the university. I think that's a good thing. In the Ben Shapiro debate, Destiny said that he thought it was a terrible thing for conservatives to be sort of segmenting and siloing off in these places, because they're making their own universities or their own institutes. Wouldn't it be better if it was this kind of open conversation? I don't think that open conversation can be restarted until they get a foothold somewhere else and proof of concept their way into being taken seriously again.
I get it. Also... I if I may, I just wanted, because I saw this for the last maybe 10 years. Universities would say, we want an open and honest dialogue. We want to hear from all sides. But then when anyone who deviated from the orthodoxy came on campus, even if they were an academic or not, heck, even Bill Maher, this happened to. The students themselves would shut it down. They would protest it. They would do a heckler's veto, cut the mic, snatch the mic from them, right? Yell so loud that they couldn't be heard. All these things. And while on the one hand, people should have the right to protest and things like that, on the other hand, I think this is indicative of not just a problem with the staff and the faculty, because this wasn't their problem. The faculty was inviting these people in. It's the students. The students are the problem. So I want to talk about it, if I may, briefly from that angle, right? How are students failing themselves and the academic institutions? We've talked a little bit about that, why people like cheating and taking shortcuts and things like that. But I want to talk about this more broadly, right? The academic student of today, how are they, or are they even worse off than the academic student of 30, 40, 50 years ago? What do we think?
Should I go first, or do you want to go first, Ukerist?
Pick one, gang. Whichever
I'll
one
go.
of you is prettier.
I think that there is a potential problem that we face at the student level, which is students coming in and viewing themselves primarily as activists and not as students. I do think that's an issue if that is your perspective. If you're coming in with what you think of as a firm ideology, a moral crusade to go on, and that's how you view your time at university, that's obviously not conducive to the kind of education that we want. But at the same time, I don't think that's new. Just like universities have always been, left of center in the sense that they encourage out of the box thinking that's not shared by many of the broader population.
What is new about this, though? Because maybe you disagree with me, but I have seen a difference.
Yeah.
Between when I went to college back in 2000, right? And 2015.
I'll just be a cranky conservative and say the difference is an erosion of civility norms. That oh my gosh, I'm still mad about this, so allow me to complain. But I think one of the worst things we ever did was stop enforcing obscenity laws. On my college campus today, I'm walking to class, and in a parking spot next to a main artery on campus, a sidewalk that everyone on campus basically has to pass, there was this person with this giant bumper sticker of giant anime boobs that just said "got milk," and I was like, what, number one, embarrassing thing to have on your car. Number two, what decent human leaves the house with that on their property? Anyways, I think that's part of an issue, which is a broader issue, which is just an erosion of decency and civility norms, and a respect for institutional hierarchy. I think students in general right now think of themselves as far more equal to their professors than they did in previous generations. There's little to no
Absolutely.
deference in most places, and so yeah, if anything is different, it's just sort of the amount of sort of egalitarian assumptions they come in with, and that shows in the sort of moral crusades. I do think we're kind of past the peak right now. Well, maybe the October 7th stuff is proving me wrong on this, but we kind of, in the 2016-17 era was when I think we saw the most crazy stuff with like riots about Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro being chased out by Antifa and all. I think it was really wacky then. I think things have chilled out in general in the past few years. But yeah, probably still bad and probably still something to fix, but I just don't know how. I don't know how to take a student who has no tendency or concept to think in terms of like deference and respect and make them deferential or respectful.
I mean, I got an idea, right? So I think we talk about cowardice. Universities are cowards to their students. They've given in. When students try to pressure the faculty or the staff to either not have a guest speaker that they don't like, or to get rid of a professor or to get a professor in trouble. I don't know if you heard this story, but there was it was at a law school. Was it Columbia? No, I don't think it was Columbia. It might have been Berkeley. It was a few years ago. Basically, it was a law question on racial laws, right? On hate crime laws, and the question involved the N-word aspergated. And so what I mean by that is the N asterisk 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 asterisk. One of the students there claimed that it made them feel so unsafe, and was, at least for a time, this was thankfully later overturned, but for a few months, they got that professor put on probation, right? They were able to leverage their power as a student and in the times to get that, to have a negative impact on that professor for the craziest shit, right? And I don't just blame the students for that. I blame the faculty for that. I blame the staff for that. I blame the university for that. Wait, you know what you do when a child throws a tantrum? You don't give in to them. You don't. And I think that far too many universities have given in to these people, right? And I think that's been a mistake. But maybe I'm wrong. Sorry, didn't mean to go on that rant. I want to get into your guys' opinions. You're my guest here. So, liberal professor, thoughts on all this? Go ahead. Students, are they the real problem?
Well, they're not the real. There's a lot of problems to say which one is the real problem. In a way, they're all kind of real problems, but and in a way, they're all not, I guess you could say, if you're looking at real as one central problem. But I would say, to some extent, you are right, Wick, and Ukerist. I would echo a lot of things Ukerist said as well. But one thing I would also say is not just cowardice, but I think one of the issues that we suffer, if you want to go back to students, well, students are not created in a vacuum. They are created through an upbringing and so on. And one of the issues that, this goes back again, I'm trying to advertise liberal education. Everybody should get a liberal education. This is why it's good for you. If you are growing up in the condition that we are today, what I found is that a lot of people and a lot of students suffer from a huge lack of confidence. And this confidence manifests itself in very interesting ways. Lack of confidence.
Wait,
I had a
what?
professor.
Hold on.
Confidence.
Hold on.
Yeah, I know. This is very paradoxical. I know.
But I, at least first blush, I think the exact opposite is true. But carry on.
Yeah, I know. But here's what I mean by that. Confidence, what I am talking about, is not the ability to assert yourself, but the ability to be comfortable in what you believe in and get your affirmation internally rather than externally. And one thing that I find out is a lot of people, this is when you say people shut down conversations and such, is because they don't have the tolerance to hear it, is because they lack confidence in their own ideas, in their own claims, because they haven't thought them through. and any form of pushback can lead to foundation falling apart because it's shaky. That's not saying the ideas are bad. It's just that they haven't been thought through properly to become firm. And I can give you a good example. This is not my own idea, since we're talking about not plagiarizing people. This is an idea I got from a professor and a friend who was talking about the politics of the Middle East. And this is kind of like what he diagnosed as the problem in the Middle East during the 2001 or so. And he said a good story to me that I never forget. This is like, he said, this is what I mean when I'm talking about confidence. He was a Muslim, and he was roommate with two Cubans, one of them atheist, one of them Catholic. And him and the atheist got really into it over the existence of God. And they were yelling at each other, where their Catholic roommate was just sitting there watching TV. And my professor, bless his heart, got mad at him. He says, why aren't you arguing for the existence of God? You're Catholic. You go to church every Sunday. What are you doing? Why am I fighting this battle alone? And then the Catholic student looked at him, looked at the guy, looked back at him, smiled and said, I'm not the one going to hell. And then just goes back watching TV. This is what he meant when he says confidence. It's like, I know what I believe in. I don't need to prove anything to anybody. If you want to debate me and come and confront me, that's totally fine. I will engage with you, but I'm not getting my affirmation from your lack of belief in me or approval of me. My belief comes from an internal source. And he kind of related that to a lot of politics in the Middle East. He was Iranian, so he was talking about the politics of Iran. And one of the interesting things about the politics of Iran is that it's most of its politics come as a form of like resistance. But the problem with resistance is that it's always reactionary, and it's reacting to something. And it's always a form of like saying, well, I am not that thing. That's how the politics, resistance is not always that, but in the form of Iranian foreign policy comes a lot of in the form of that. And he says this is kind of a demonstration that the Iranian regime doesn't have confidence in its people and its ability and its economy and its philosophy, which is why it's not asserting what it is as what it is, but rather asserting it as an opposition to the American regime, for example.
I think I'm kind of picking up what you're putting down. I use confidence in a very different way, so I think that's maybe where the disconnect is coming from. I think that too often, and this is what I mean about confidence, right? Is when I say that students have or people, I should just say, Americans, have an overabundance of confidence nowadays, is that they are unwilling to brook dissent, right? Because they are right. They don't need to like, they don't need to listen to you. Why would they ever listen to you? They are correct. And they can do anything they like without any training. They don't have to study. They don't have to practice. They can just take any shortcut they want. They have this access to so many options and things like that. They have this unearned confidence that hits a wall when it comes to any kind of real challenge. But the problem is those walls that they used to hit have become weak, have become porous, right? Have become no longer an obstacle. So where they would be humbled by saying, well, I grew up, my daddy would get me anything I wanted, right? And so I come to this school, I'm going to get anything I want, where before they'd learn a hard lesson that that's not true. I don't think they're learning that lesson anymore. I think it's just being like, yeah, actually, no, daddy can get what you want because daddy pays the school's bills and daddy can get you anything you want. And that's a problem, right? And I'm being a little hyperbolic about it, but I that's just my thoughts. But anyway, Ukerist, I saw you doing a lot of head movements, and I don't know what they mean. So perhaps
if
interpret.
I may just,
Oh,
sorry, Ukerist, if
yeah,
I just
please.
make one
No, please.
real quick thing. I agree with you, Wick, but I would not call unearned confidence confidence. I would call it hubris, and I consider that to be a
Different,
form of
sure.
lack of confidence. But I fully agree with you on that. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, we're just using words different, which is fine. Ukerist, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I'm in a weird spot. This is another thing I would complain about academia if we had more time, I guess, is that a lot of academic work is done by people whose jobs are less secure than the tenured professors we're mostly complaining about. And so I'm in a temporary position right now. I'm contract based, year to year kind of thing. and so I don't have much in the way of institutional protection, and in the hunt for a permanent tenure track job, hopefully my teaching evaluations matter, right? And so one of the strange incentives of the modern university is that we use students to evaluate their instructors and then use those evaluations to rank them internally and externally for applying for jobs. And so there is a strong disincentive to doing things that make your students uncomfortable. But as we keep referencing Plato, education is a very deeply uncomfortable thing sometimes. The allegory of the cave talks about, being freed from your chains and being compelled to look at the light that hurts your eyes, right? It sucks to find out that you're wrong about things. And so you can still do. I'm not saying. I'm trying not to come across like I have this persecution complex. I can do that for my students. I can challenge their ideas, but I can't come into the classroom in the position that I'm in as a temporary worker and be a hard ass and make give them really hard papers and hammer them down all of that unearned confidence and all of that privilege talking. I can't do that as effectively as I could perhaps in previous eras when being the asshole professor was kind of the norm, and as I could maybe at a different institution or with some sort of institutional protection like tenure. I'm limited in my ability to make them severely uncomfortable. Again, uncomfortable in healthy ways, not uncomfortable in Title IX ways. Okay, just to be clear.
I get what you're saying, and I just want to kind of touch on this because I think it's something I hadn't considered. But as soon as you said it, it made all sorts of sense. Is that kind of rating of the professor that goes on? I'm curious because I don't know how influential are those ratings to you keeping or getting better jobs, like keeping your job currently or getting better one. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how important are they?
I'm probably on the lower side. Universities in general are figuring out that they're really bad. That it's really terrible information, and because we're so cognizant of disparate impacts these days, they really do negatively impact foreign speaking students and women. Like I have colleagues, some women I went to grad school with who are far smarter than I will ever be. I've seen them teach, I've read their papers, they're brilliant, and students are lucky to have them. And they've shown me some of their evals, and they are some of the most vile, nasty things. Like I've never realized so deeply how actual disadvantage works for some of my friends, like reading those evals, or like there are lots of Chinese and Korean students at my grad school. Same thing for them. Like they again, to me, that they speak perfect English. They're brilliant people, but because they have an accent, they'll just get the most vile feedback from students. And so universities are now kind of cognizant of the fact that there's real skews in this data, and they probably shouldn't rely on it as heavily as other metrics, but some people still do really care about it, and they do still collect it, and they do still look at it, and so it's something I have to be aware of.
I know that universities are looking, at least the teaching universities, smaller universities, still weigh that somewhat, no?
Yeah, so if you're applying for a job at a teaching university, they really want to know, they want evidence of teaching success, and that can come in various forms. From the people I've talked to in hiring committees, they are trying to push them to emphasize teaching evals less, knowing how bad they can be. But yeah, a lot of if what the school you're applying for wants you to do is primarily teach rather than primarily research, they want some sort of evidence that you're really good at it. Maybe it's awards, maybe they want to see your syllabi. If you do an on-campus interview, they'll make you teach a sample class. They want to know for sure that you're a good teacher, and one of the ways they look at it is these student evals.
I'm glad to hear that they are emphasizing it less, but the fact that it's there and the fact that these things get this kind of traditional kind of thing where even if now they don't matter as much, the fact that they did in the past, people have kind of a PTSD with these things. I'm talking about military institutions. That's what I'm more familiar with. I know that even after there's a structural change in the military where we do away with something we've done for years and years and years, there's lag between the time that the new thing is adopted to behavioral change within the ranks, right? So, for example, right before I got out of the military, they changed the way we did our evaluations. So usually you would want what's called a firewall 5, okay? So 1 to 5, 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. Classic, unless you were bad at your job, you got a 5, right? even if you were bad at your job, you got a 5. If you could follow the glass, you got a 5, right? Unless you like piss someone off, you got a 5. If you got a 4, you fucked up. Someone hated you. I don't know what you did, but it was a problem. Okay. They changed it though to have a limited number of 5s per department, per division, per squad, etc. And so now suddenly, people who are used to getting 5s all the time are suddenly getting 3s, right? Which is the average, which is the most, right? And so you saw a lag in how people would normally go about writing these evaluations and giving out these evaluations and prepping for these evaluations to how they were received and utilized by the squadron and by the rank and file, if you will. And so I'm curious, and I'm just wondering if that's probably playing a role in university as well with these teaching things. It's just a supposition. It's just a guess, I think. But we are running out of time, and I hate to cut this short, but I wanted to ask one last question before we get to closing statements, things like that. And the question would be, what is the number one change that you would like to see in academia today? Something that if you could snap your fingers or wave your magic wand, the one thing that you would change today in the fields of academia. And the second question, I guess, is a two-parter. What would you tell someone who is getting into academia or who possibly wants to get academia? What's the best piece of advice that you would give someone who wants to be involved in academia? And go ahead. We'll start with Ukerist, and then we'll go to liberal professor. Go ahead.
Okay, one thing I would change if I could snap my fingers, probably give myself a job. I think permanently.
Oh, sure,
But
sure.
I on a broader structural level, I think it's tough because you're asking me to snap my fingers and do it. But I would want some sort of rethinking and restructuring about how administration is done. I think there's some incentive structure issues with the way certain admin work goes, where certain departments, obviously they think their stuff is most important, and so they're pushing for a bigger budget, and that it like the proportion of university resources going towards administration and marketing versus education, I think is probably imbalanced in some way that I don't know exactly how to fix. So if I'm snapping my fingers, I would say fix it, and it would hopefully be magically fixed. What I would say to somebody who wants to go into academia, well, I'll say what the first person I talked to about it, who did my PhD program before me, said, well, if nobody has told you, don't do it. And then the second thing he said was it's something you should only do if you can't really imagine doing anything else. And then the third thing is it was a really wonderful experience and very fulfilling. And so basically I would say, like, if you find yourself in your coursework in undergrad, like thinking more deeply about things than your classmates, if you get more excited about work than your classmates, if you're a curious person and you're seeking out things about your material outside of class, that might be a sign that this is the kind of thing that could interest you and do some looking into. I'll say that actually, no, this dumbest, simplest piece of advice I would say is that nobody tells you for a long time, but if you really do want to get into academia, don't pay for a grad degree most of the time. There's a bunch of asterisks, but you should apply for PhD programs that are funded, and they will pay you and remit your tuition. That's the ideal, and that's the goal. And then if you have enough money to do a master's and ladder your way up, do it. But in general, it will never, like, unlike law school, unlike med school, it will almost never be financially viable to go get a PhD on your own dime. So try not to if you can. That's practical speaking. Yeah.
Thank you. Liberal professor, same questions.
So we can ask for anything, no matter how unrealistic and unreasonable.
Oh, well, okay. So in the spirit of the questions, like, obviously, right, if we could all snap our fingers, like being an academic would make you super filthy rich, and you would have the gender of your choice hanging off your every whim, right? But let's deal in the realm of the real world. So go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to give them two answers. One unreasonable, which I would say I would pass a law that says no university class can have more than 10 students. So small class sizes. That would be my unreasonable claim. And my reasonable law would be that the contract professors and contract professors should have a better job opportunities and not be burdened by teaching 6 classes a semester and have no time for research and so they can dedicate some time to their own research and build up their resume. That would be another thing that I would add. More reasonable ask.
Well,
One thing. Oh,
thank you both. Oh, go ahead.
oh, you asked about like one advice that I would give to people who are thinking about academia is that it's like an addiction. Like I said, I wasn't kidding when I say there's a high when you figure something out, and it's a really, really noble thing to get into. But just so you know, it's a very thankless job. People are going to be looking at you funny a lot of times because you're dedicating 10 years of your life to learning one very niche specific thing, which is not always appreciated. So keep that in mind. And it can be a very lonely, lonely occupation.
Well, thank you both for being here. Gang, we're going to let them shout themselves out in a second, but before we do, gang, tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have Ukrainian Anna on to talk about the situation in Ukraine. The funding bill in America, right, recently has... There's been a lot of issues, right? Tucker Carlson interviewed Putin, right? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the state of the war. Is it winnable still for Ukraine? At what point do they sue for peace? At what point do they talk about a ceasefire, if any, right? What are some of the ways that we here in the West can help Ukraine out? Should we help Ukraine out? We're going to talk to her. It's going to be a great discussion. And after we're done with her, P.F. Young is going to come on and talk about why we shouldn't support Ukraine. So we're going to get both sides of the issue tomorrow. Tune in. And if you like this content, hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this on Twitch or Kick, give me money there. Hit that follow button. All good. Let us go to shoutouts. Where can people, if they wanted to find you, Liberal Professor, where can they find you?
So they can find me on YouTube. I haven't made a video in a month, mainly because of my own work taking a lot of time. But they can follow me on Instagram as well, or X, or whatever it is now. I'm not a very social, like, media savvy person. So yeah, go there. I usually post like that when my videos are up, if they're up. And if you're enjoying liberalism, go watch some of my videos. You might find it interesting. Might be some of it might be funny. I don't know. But yeah, and if I may, one shout out, if you're a conservative and thinking about social sciences, you should absolutely consider it, because there's a rich and beautiful tradition of conservatism from Edmund Burke to Oakeshott to George Grant that you absolutely would enjoy. Don't be afraid. There's a tradition there, so don't worry about it. Don't listen to Ben Shapiro. You'll be fine.
Thank you again for being here. Really appreciated your insight. And go
Thank
check
you for
him out,
having
gang.
me.
Give him a follow, give him a subscribe, all that. Ukerist, what about you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I don't really do any like streaming or content creation these days. The only content creation I do is on Substack. So I write a Substack called Everything Was Beautiful. It's a Vonnegut quote, but yeah, everything was beautiful.substack.com, and then there's links out from there to some of my other academic work if you're interested in that kind of thing. But just write some essays about the books that I'm reading, and general advice about book collecting and some other stuff. So it's a fun time over at Everything Was Beautiful. Yeah.
Check him out,
Thanks for
gang.
having me.
No, thank you for being here. We love you, Chris. We got to get you both on more often. But for now, we're gonna raid out. We're gonna go to Prime Kai. Say hi to Prime Kai. Let him know it's a hate raid. And again, tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, and talk with me and Ukrainian Anna, because I think, and I'll just end this on this note. Ukraine is the issue of our day. It is the most important issue, foreign policy wise, of the modern age, and we cannot, under any circumstances, allow Ukraine to fall. Anyway, with that, we're gonna let raid out. So bye, wave everyone, bye, bye, bye.